He was the leader of the Catholic Church, sworn to uphold its holiest traditions. But his most shocking actions were not in a chapel, they were in the private chambers of the papal palace. We like to think of popes as figures of piety, but the story of Pope Julius III is a whirlwind of scandal, corruption, and a very, very questionable relationship with a teenage street urchin he adopted and made a cardinal. This is the story of how one of the most powerful men in the world risked it all for a boy, creating one of the most corrupt and controversial papacies in history. Before the scandal that would forever define him, Pope Julius III was Giovanni Maria Ciocchi del Monte. Born in Rome in 1487, he was a product of the High Renaissance, a time of dazzling artistic achievement, but also of intense political and religious turmoil. The Papal States were not just a spiritual domain, they were a kingdom, and the Pope was a monarch who waged wars, forged alliances, and played the great game of European politics. It was an era where the sacred and the profane often blurred into one. By all accounts, Giovanni del Monte was a sharp and capable man. He was a distinguished expert in canon law, the Church's complex legal system, and his career was a steady climb up the ecclesiastical ladder. He served as an archbishop, a bishop, and a trusted papal diplomat. In 1536, Pope Paul III made him a cardinal, a nod to his administrative skill and loyalty. His biggest job before becoming pope was as co-president of the Council of Trent, which kicked off in 1545. This was the Church's high-stakes, long-overdue answer to the Protestant Reformation. For years, figures like Martin Luther had openly challenged papal authority and condemned the Church's corruption. The council was meant to fix things from within, and Del Monte was at the very center of it all, tasked with defending the faith. But underneath the surface of a dutiful church reformer was a man who loved the finer things in life: lavish banquets, hunting, and the theater. This tug-of-war between his public duty and his private desires would soon define his papacy in the most spectacular way possible. When Pope Paul III died in November 1549, the cardinals gathered in Rome for one of the longest and most politically charged conclaves of the 16th century. They were locked away from the world in hastily built wooden cells in the Vatican, but the world's pressures were still very much inside with them. The conclave was a proxy war between Europe's two superpowers, France under King Henry II, and the Holy Roman Empire led by the formidable Charles V. Each king wanted his own candidate on the papal throne. The cardinals were split into factions: the French, the Imperials, and a third group loyal to the family of the last pope, the Farnese. The stakes were huge. The biggest issue was the future of the Council of Trent. Emperor Charles V desperately wanted it to continue, while King Henry II of France opposed it, seeing it as a political tool for his rival. For 10 weeks, the conclave was deadlocked. Candidates were proposed and shot down. At one point, the English Cardinal Reginald Pole was just one vote away from victory, but he refused to campaign for himself, and the moment passed. 2 cardinals even died during the grueling process. With the major players unable to get their way, they began looking for a compromise. They needed someone who was not too tied to either France or the Empire. Their eyes fell on Cardinal Del Monte. He was a seasoned diplomat and had overseen the Council of Trent. After dozens of ballots, a deal was struck. On February 7, 1550, Giovanni Del Monte was elected pope, taking the name Julius III. The world waited to see what he would do. Nobody could have predicted the storm of scandal he was about to unleash. The story that would stain Julius III's name forever started a few years earlier on the streets of Parma. Cardinal Del Monte met a spirited street kid named Innocenzo, who was about 14 or 15 at the time. The boy was reportedly in a scrape with a pet ape from the cardinal's household. Del Monte was amused by the boy's feisty nature and brought him into his home as a lowly hall boy. This might have been a minor historical footnote, but when Del Monte became pope in 1550, everything changed. One of his first acts was to send for Innocenzo. He had his brother formally adopt the now 17-year-old boy, giving him the family name Ciocchi del Monte. Then, to the utter shock of the papal court, Julius made Innocenzo a cardinal. Now, the role of cardinal nephew was a long-standing, if shady, tradition. Since popes could not have legitimate sons, they would appoint a nephew to a top spot to help run things. The word nepotism literally comes from this. But Innocenzo was not Julius's nephew. He was a kid off the street with no education, no connections, and zero qualifications. Contemporary accounts paint a picture of a boy completely out of his depth. He had no interest in an education, which proved to be a total failure, and he was known for his rude, impulsive behavior. Yet Julius not only gave him a cardinal's hat, but also made him his chief political and diplomatic agent. The Pope did not stop at power. He showered Innocenzo with wealth, granting him control over rich abbeys and revenues. In a flash, the former beggar was one of the wealthiest men in Europe. The boy who had nothing was now a prince of the church, but everyone in Rome was whispering about why. Making an unqualified teenager a cardinal was bad enough, but it was the nature of their relationship that truly scandalized Rome. Rumors caught fire. Poets and critics mockingly called Innocenzo the Pope's Ganymede, a nod to the beautiful boy Zeus took as his lover in Greek mythology. These weren't just idle rumors. The Venetian ambassador, a respected diplomat whose job was to report facts, wrote that Innocenzo shared the Pope's own bedroom and bed. The relationship was so obvious that some tried to save face by suggesting the boy must be Julius's illegitimate son. Julius himself did little to help. He supposedly showed the impatience of a lover awaiting a mistress, while waiting for Innocenzo to arrive in Rome, and openly boasted about the boy's talents. This scandal was a disaster for the Catholic Church. The Protestant Reformation was gaining steam, pointing to Roman corruption as proof the papacy was morally bankrupt. The story of Julius and Innocenzo became the ultimate propaganda gift. One English Puritan later wrote, "It was Julius's custom to promote none to ecclesiastical livings, save only his buggerers." Inside the Vatican, panic set in. Cardinals pleaded with Julius to distance himself from Innocenzo, warning that he was risking the papacy's authority itself. But Julius would not budge. He refused to give up his favorite. Instead, he created a workaround. Since Innocenzo was completely incapable of doing his job, Julius simply transferred all his duties to a more competent official, effectively creating the powerful new office of the Secretary of State just to cover for his lover's incompetence. The affair with Innocenzo was just the centerpiece of a papacy built on rewarding friends and family. Julius III seemed to see his office as a way to elevate the Del Monte clan, making at least 5 of his actual relatives cardinals. This kind of nepotism was fairly standard for a Renaissance pope. It was a way to build a loyal power base within the College of Cardinals and secure a family's future. But Julius took it further. His election had been secured partly through a deal with the powerful Farnese family, promising to support their claim to the territories of Parma and Piacenza in exchange for their votes. It was a raw political transaction, blending state and church business. To his credit, Julius did make one brief attempt at reform. He knew that clergymen holding multiple offices to collect income, a practice called pluralism, was a huge problem. He issued an order to try and limit it, but it was a small gesture in a pontificate defined by indulgence. His real interest wasn't cleaning up the church, it was enjoying the perks of the job. His papacy demonstrated the very problems that fueled the Reformation: leaders more interested in power, wealth, and pleasure than spiritual duty. Despite the personal chaos, Pope Julius III still had a job to do: lead the Church's response to the Protestant Reformation through the Council of Trent. He had presided over its first session, so he was expected to get things moving again. Julius ordered the council to reconvene in May 1551. Under his watch, important decrees were issued on core Catholic doctrines like the Eucharist. But politics quickly got in the way. Tensions with King Henry II of France, who remained hostile to the council, flared up again. French bishops refused to even show up, which undermined the whole effort. The final nail in the coffin came in 1552. The council's protector, Emperor Charles V, was betrayed by an ally and forced to flee his stronghold. Without the emperor's army to guarantee safety, Trent was no longer secure. On April 28, 1552, less than a year after it had reopened, Pope Julius III had to suspend the Council of Trent once again. This failure was a deep disappointment for Julius. Discouraged by the political mess, he essentially gave up. After 1552, he largely withdrew from the frustrating world of European politics and church reform. The crucial work of the Council of Trent would stall for a decade, waiting for a later pope to pick up the pieces. Julius was tired of his duties and wanted to enjoy a life of leisure. Withdrawing from his papal duties, Julius III spent his final years and a fortune of church money on a passion project, a magnificent palace on the edge of Rome called the Villa Giulia. Built between 1551 and 1553, this was his personal pleasure dome, a retreat from the stuffy Vatican where he could live in comfort. The villa was a Mannerist masterpiece designed by the era's greatest artists, including Giorgio Vasari and Bartolomeo Ammanati, with likely input from Michelangelo. It was an intimate space built for pleasure, with elegant courtyards and a stunning three-level sunken grotto full of fountains. The Pope was personally involved in every detail and would often travel from the Vatican by boat on the Tiber River to spend his days there. Today, the Villa Giulia is a cultural treasure housing the National Etruscan Museum, but at the time it was a symbol of the Pope's priorities. While the church was in crisis, its leader was building a luxurious party villa. He was a patron of the arts, to be sure. He reappointed Michelangelo as chief architect of St. Peter's Basilica and supported the new Jesuit order, but these acts were overshadowed by his retreat into luxury. The Villa Giulia stood as a monument to his personal desires, not his spiritual duties. In his final years, the critical work of church reform was left completely undone. Pope Julius III died on March 23, 1555. For his favorite, Innocenzo del Monte, the Pope's death was a disaster. Without his protector, his influence evaporated overnight. The popes who followed had no patience for the embarrassment he represented. Innocenzo's life spiraled into crime and depravity. He was eventually imprisoned for murdering two men who had insulted him, and he was later convicted for the rape of at least two women. The once powerful boy cardinal who had shared a bed with the Pope died in total obscurity in 1577, buried in an unmarked grave. The legacy of Julius III is one of scandal and failure. He is a cautionary tale of a pope who let personal vices completely overshadow his duties. His relationship with Innocenzo left a permanent stain on the papacy, giving its critics endless ammunition and confirming the worst accusations of corruption. His withdrawal from leadership after 1552 meant a critical decade was lost in the fight to address the Protestant Reformation. The Council of Trent, the very body he once led, stalled because he lost interest. Pope Julius III represents the end of an era, the last true Renaissance-style pope, a man who saw the office as a prize, not a sacred trust. His story is a stark reminder of how the personal failings of a leader can tarnish a centuries-old institution. The story of Julius III is a shocking one, but the history of the papacy is filled with controversial figures. Who do you think was the most respectable pope in history? Let us know in the comments below. If you want to explore more hidden stories from the past, make sure to like and subscribe.